Welcome to our masterclass of today. Today we're having a masterclass with Wanjira Mathai. I'm very happy to welcome Wanjira and all of you. Let me, from the outset, invite all of you to introduce yourselves if you can, if you want, in the chat box with your name and where you are located, so that you start also engaging with one another. The masterclass today is about inclusive leadership. It's about leadership, regenerative development, and the importance of partnership. And we all know we are undergoing a climate crisis, a crisis that we need to address the unsustainable societies that we have. And Wanjira has been working for many years in this field. Let me tell you that Wanjira was a member of the Earth Charter International Council for some years, several years ago. And I do remember that she was a council member precisely around the time she was putting together the vision of the Wangari Mathai Foundation, which I think it's quite interesting. Now, Wanjira is still very involved with the Wangari Mathai Foundation, but she's now the managing director for Africa in the in global partnerships at WRI, the World Resources Institute, which, by the way, the World Resources Institute was founded by Gus Beth, who had also been involved in the Earth Charter many years ago. It's an institution that we appreciate. Informally, she served as the vice president and regional director for Africa and co-chair for WRI, the World Resources Institute. She's currently the chair of the Wangari Mathai Foundation and the former chair of the Green Belt Movement. The Green Belt Movement has been an Earth Charter affiliated institution for many years. Thank you for being here with us today, Wanjira.
An absolute pleasure, Miriam. Thank you very much for having me. This is excellent, and I see so many beautiful faces, so this is wonderful.
Thank you. So I want to warmly welcome you. We are in Costa Rica, you are in Kenya. We have a different time zone, and we are welcoming people here who come from different time zones also. I see Deborah Ellen. I think Deborah is in Guam, in the Pacific. I just want to acknowledge that Varily is in Brazil, Maria Vilches is in Puerto Rico, and we have people from Africa, of course from Kenya also, Jane Kilonzo, from Japan, so Wakayama University is joining us here, Michael Bracken from the US. We have people from Holland, Lide, Irma, and others from Holland. Welcome and thank you. This is a group that has, some of us, we are involved in their charter in different ways, others aren't. So we have board members such as Paul Lubers, who is here. His father was also very close to your mother,
Yes.
Wangari Mathai. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. I feel actually we must also start by paying tribute to Wangari Mathai, who was your mother and was also very close friend and involved in the drafting process of the Earth Charter. Wangari attended several drafting committee meetings around the Earth Charter back in the 90s. And I remember that during all sessions, she pushed us to really focus on trying to make it simple as much as possible and focus on concrete actions. She always said, okay, let's see what we can actually do in practice. As a minimum, let's go home and plant a tree. It was always a message from Wangari. And also very committed with youth engagement, which you also have been a part of that. Last point I wanted to mention, which I think is a nice anecdote, in the late 1990, when we had the last consultation meeting of the Earth Charter, around the drafting of the Earth Charter, which took place in South Africa. Wangari was supposed to attend, but suddenly she couldn't, and she sent your brother, Muta Mathai, to take part in one of these last regional consultations in South Africa. So thank you, you and your family. for doing that.
Absolutely.
So let me start with a question. If you could please talk or share with us about the current work you are doing as the Managing Director for Africa in Global Partnerships at the WRI, the World Resources Institute. What is the focus of WRI now in Africa?
Miriam, first of all, thank you. Thank you very much. I can hardly believe, first of all, you don't look a day older than all those years ago. And it's been a while. And I have to say, when I was thinking about today and the work that you and the leadership that you and the Earth Charter team have had over the decades, really, and the foresight, because today, compared to then, you're not making the case of the centrality of earth justice and the concepts that were being talked about then. So I absolutely agree with you. We're standing on the shoulders of giants, and they came before us. You mentioned Gus and everybody in that committee, so passionate, so committed to every word. I was looking at some of the speeches my mother was giving at the time, and she was so keen that the word justice be there, as you mentioned, action be there. But that's leadership. And I think in many ways, the Earth Charter is a tremendous symbol of leadership in every way. So you should be very, very proud of that. And, as you mentioned, my journey has now brought me to the World Resources Institute through many circles. And I tell people often, smiling, that I work today at the intersection of everything that I care about. I've worked in environment, I've worked in public health, and part of my background, my real academic background is in public health and business. And today I find myself at the intersection of all of these things. And you ask what the World Resources Institute and certainly the Africa work is about. WRI is, for many people who may know the World Resources Institute, or WRI as we like to call ourselves, it's a research organization, and it's essentially focused on how you turn research and data and evidence into action. That if we have enough evidence, if we have the data that we have, we can actually begin to change things. And if we start to see change happening, we have a great potential for scale. So we have a motto that we love. We call it "Count It," that we have to do the hard work of data analysis. We have to start with data, creating user-friendly information that we then share with, policymakers and those who hold them accountable, and then begin to use them in platforms of cities and forests and other ecosystems to work with leaders and private sector and country leaders to see whether this data can be ground truth. Is there evidence? Is this evidence the case? Do we really know that forests are crucial for ecosystem integrity, that they interact with the food systems, they interact with water systems, and all of that we have data for, but then we have to begin to see how it works on the ground. And then the scaling is really where transformation happens. We are identifying and overcoming all sorts of barriers that hold us back as we work. And often, as you mentioned, Miriam, in partnership. At WRI, we say partnership is everybody's business. We have got to work in partnership, because alone we just do not have enough of the wisdom that's needed to bring about the sort of systemic transformation that we need to see. We are so far behind, and we know that, given the biggest issue of our time, climate, that the level of vulnerability, the level of poverty renders especially the most vulnerable to be in high risk areas. And with the level of vulnerability we see, we cannot but begin to think, how do we engage? How do we build economic muscle so that we build lasting resilience? And that all of these are connected. So for us at WRI, partnership is really important. But we are entering at WRI a phase of a new strategy. WRI has historically worked in 7 pillars of work. And we essentially were looking at data and analysis very deeply across cities, forests, water, food, and climate. And everybody knew that if you want really good city data, WRI has it. And that's true. It's still true. But we also began to say, now we know so much. We've done World Resource reports, deep dives that takes 5 to 10 years on cities, on food systems. What are we going to do about it? And so the strategy that we just kicked in this year, middle of last year, is focused on working at the level of impact. What impact can we really have? We know what we know. We've had significant effort to test it. We have got to work this at a country level. And actually, my work at the Africa program is really about looking at WRI's strategy at the country level. And we work in 5 core countries, Miriam. We're working in Kenya, we're working in Rwanda, and DRC, and Ethiopia, and the Republic of Congo, mainly to see what is an action plan that is anchored on the transformation development pathway for any particular country. What can we do as WRI, and how do we crowd in a community of purpose that helps us reach that? And all within the North Star, and WRI has made a decision that everything we do will need to be seen through the lens of nature, through the lens of people, and through the lens of climate. So we have 3 key pillars of work in Africa. The first one is on landscape restoration and forest protection. We call it vital landscapes because it essentially covers the integrity of ecosystems and how they impact on food, land, and water. And so that's one clear pillar of work that is building around. Many of you will have seen me championing landscape restoration in Africa. This pillar of work sits here. And then the protection of critical ecosystems in different countries, but most important for us, obviously, the mighty Congo forest and Congo Basin, that is the heart of the continent and really the healthiest lung of the global of our globe today. And then we have an important part of work on cities. We call this inclusive cities because we African cities, we know in the next 50 years, by 2050 actually, 1 in 5 people will live in an African city. And what does that mean for how our cities grow? The infrastructure needed for our cities has not yet been built. So cities are at the core of how we build inclusivity. And then the last piece of work is on equity, on climate, and how we focus our work on especially adaptation. So Miriam, I know we're going to go into some discussion, so I'll stop there for now.
Yeah, thank you, Wanjira. Thank you. Wanjira, you just mentioned about WRI reports, and suddenly it came to my mind that 20 years ago, actually, in 2004, a WRI report on good governance, on sustainability. I have used it largely for several years. It includes a section on the Earth Charter, actually, that report. But it's a very good report for anyone who is interested in participatory processes and partnerships, and good examples of good governance for sustainability and environment. I want to highlight that as a very, although it's 20 years old, is extremely valuable, and anyone can find it. A WRI report of 2004 on good governance. So, of course, I think it's very valuable for us what you are sharing in terms of landscape restoration, the work on cities, and bringing the context of the countries you're working in Africa. So from that position, in previous ones you have had, what could you say about your learnings, potential and challenges of leadership, especially in developing enduring and effective partnerships? What needs to be done to really have successful partnerships? I have been, actually just last week I was in a Congress and everybody was talking about collaboration, the need for collaboration, and we have several organizations some of them are working very similar, and sometimes it's obvious, but sometimes it's a challenge to collaborate, to really make sure we find the tune to generate an effective partnership. So from your perspective, what do you think needs to be done to really have successful partnerships? Can you share also maybe some examples?
Yeah. Well, I'll start by saying this, Miriam, that partnership building is hard work. It's most people, and I am one of those, have the title of partnerships and global partnerships. But what that really means is that we are almost like choir directors, because the real partnership building is done by everybody who is involved in an organization. And so that there's an element of internal partnership building, building partnerships around different departments, working across multi-sectoral parts. And we have an organization of 3,000 people at the World Resources Institute. It's hard to get people to work together, but depending on how we structure, depending on the value that we are able to communicate, depending on the levels of trust across these different teams, we start to see communities of purpose evolve internally. And I always start internally, because so often partnership building is perceived to be outside. One of the things that we are finding is it's extremely important to assess that as an organization, we are fit for partnership. How do we show up? How do we present ourselves? Are we partnership worthy? Just almost like people can be credit worthy. And that's something really important, that you're not, you shouldn't take it for granted that as an organization, you are a good partner, that there is a nurturing of internal partnership capability, how you partner, when you raise your flag, when you pull your flag down, are you trustworthy? How you communicate, and so building what we call internal partnership fitness is really, really important. And then, of course, external partnerships. One of the concepts of partnership that I really adore is the one of comparative partnership building, where we know that everybody brings something to the table. And in fact, the scale of the challenges that we all face across the globe, and certainly I can see colleagues from Africa who, whatever work we're doing, we know that we are but a slice of a bigger puzzle. And so how we build trust externally, how we convene the expectations we set of partnership building, the vision and goal. Do we have a shared vision, shared goals, and how complementary am I even necessary for this partnership? Assessing what value we bring to partnerships, and not assuming that it's there and that there's some benefit mutually that is accrued, and not just in one way. And of course, partnerships are living organisms. They shift, they move around, they change. So there's a whole bunch of opportunities. But one of my favorite ideas at the moment is that there's a real growing, especially in the environment sphere, a big chasm, because there's a lot of funding and finance around environment, and there's often the task is at the grassroots level, and sometimes those two pieces are not working together. So the idea of partnership building that is based on trust, that is across the board, is really, really important. And so there's a wonderful document that an organization I love called Mali Asili developed, called Rooted for Change. And if you could look at that document, it really begins to talk about how we all need each other, and it's acknowledged in the research, but yet some feel overwhelmed by the other. So how can we become good partners, real allies, with respect, collaboration, recognition, integration, and then the need to move away from more transactional partnerships and seeing each other truly as partners in this work?
You at some point you mentioned about about the Pan-African Conservation Organization, that they carried some research how to better support local actors. Can you mention that as an example, maybe of good partnership around trust?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're talking about the same one, it's the Africa Restoration Initiative, AFR 100. This is an initiative that is a partnership between multiple technical partners, several financial partners, and AFR 100 is anchored at the African Union NEPAD, and this unit of the African Union has set very clear goals: 100 million hectares to be restored by 2030, and has set very clear agendas. And each partner within the technical has very clear roles and responsibilities. The World Resources Institute being one of them, responsible for monitoring tools. That's where WRI's strengths are. Other organizations, IUCN, and others, and then local implementing partners are focused on AFR 100, on investing very deliberately on what we call restoration champions, and not asking, as we have often seen, Miriam, and this is where I think inclusive leadership is so important, that we don't continue to ask the question, are people ready to receive a significant sum of resources to do their work, or rather to say, what do we need to do? Because these partners are crucial to the success of this initiative. How do we build their capacity to be able to receive the sort of resources that are due them, because they're doing the heavy lifting? And so working on institutional investments, investing in both the implementation of the work, but also the strengthening of institutions at the grassroots level. So these sorts of partnerships, I think, are really the ones that will bring about the change we want to see.
In hearing you, it came to my mind the need for all of us to go through courses that help us to learn, or courses that teach us how to really build effective partnerships and inclusive partnerships. There's a lot of courses on leadership, but not necessarily all of them include that. So if you envision leadership and inclusive leadership, what is the difference? Leadership and inclusive leadership.
You know, so many people lead. They are in the front, and I love the metaphor of birds in flight, right? When birds are migrating, the leader is in front, but they're not far ahead in front of everybody else that nobody can actually see them. You have to be taking people along with you in the most fundamental sense. It's making sure that people are not left behind, and that the concept of inclusivity is anchored very much in a wonderful African concept that I love called Ubuntu, that I am nothing if you are suffering. I am because you are. And if you're not, neither am I. There's a wonderful greeting, I think it's in Botswana, where people would say, if I say, how are you, Miriam? They would respond, I am well if you are well, because your being well is dependent upon, your being well affects my ability to feel well. And in fact, I shouldn't feel well if you are not. So inclusivity just creates this sense of community, this sense of, I cannot possibly imagine that I can be the center of the universe by myself, that doesn't exist. And in very simple forms, we teach children that friendships are about inclusion. And I love a lot of children's stories talk about, you know, you need your friends. And in fact, if you are not surrounded by good friends, people who care about you, then there's a deep sense of deprivation. It's even a sadness. You need friends, even if you have all the best toys in the world. The friends are really the ones who lift you up.
Thank you, Wanjira. This is very inspiring to think about. If I'm not well, if you are not well. So let's talk a bit about your mother. I think everybody who is here have been inspired by Wangari Mathai. She was Wangari Mathai to the world, but she was your mother, of course. And we have appreciation and gratitude for so many things she has done. And I think, of course, one of the things was to win the Nobel Peace Prize as an environmentalist, as a woman, and from Africa. I mean, there are many things in there. Yeah. But also to make environment be important to the peace agenda. I think she really made a big change in that I think it was not only the first time an African woman wins the Nobel Peace Prize, but also was the first time in that realm of peace they were recognizing the importance of environmental protection in the peace agenda. So she was certainly a wonderful leader in advocating for environment awareness and protection, but also for social justice and peace. So she really saw from many years before many others these linkages of social justice, peace, and environment. So from your angle, what did you learn from her leadership style and way of being?
Yeah, Marian, we were lucky to know her. A lot of people ask me, oh my goodness, how was it to be her daughter? And I tell them, oh my goodness, if you consider the fact that my mother's activism was slow growing and quite, started the Greenbelt movement when she was already almost 40 years old. So she then did quite a bit of work in the later second half of her life. And so we were around my mother when she was very busy doing the activist grassroots work, and nobody thought it extraordinary. Neither did we. I never thought, in fact, until it's reflected by others, was you don't think your mother is doing anything more special than the next person's mother. I always assumed everybody's mother did what they did, and this is what my mother did, and it was just the way it was. And and that work, when you have that level of proximity and you're at home and you're sort of like, where are the pancakes? You don't really think of it as extraordinary work. So even for me, it was later in my life when I started to see her work with new eyes, and to see her. She was extremely prophetic in so many ways. She saw ahead. She was ahead of her time, and when we created the Wangari Mathai Foundation after she passed on in 2011, it was really to say that her work and her life had so much more to share and to inspire, and we needed to continue to hear her voice, because her voice was ahead of its time and it was more and more relevant, and today we say the same thing. Oh my goodness, a lot of people, especially the Kenyans in the audience, will know that we often, when a disaster strikes, a natural disaster, we remember the words that she said. Nature can be very vicious if we do not take care of it, and especially if we do not stop encroaching. And so when I talk about my mother, it's often very difficult for me to separate the pieces, but I also have to say I did spend some time looking at her from the outside, sort of like being away and sort of saying, wow, this is extraordinary, but I don't think anyone will ever know. That's what we used to say, like, nobody will ever know just how prophetic and how extraordinary she is. But I share a few aspects of her that we talk about a lot at the Wangari Mathai Foundation. One is Wangari Mathai, the environmentalist. The work that she started, as you mentioned, Miriam, at the Greenbelt movement was extremely genius. The genius of the movement, the fact that you needed to be inclusive of those who are facing the gravest impacts of environmental degradation, lack of water, lack of nutritious food, and lack of a healthy environment, so that the rivers could flow and fodder could be available for animals, and food and fruit for the children. The fact that all of that was depleted was connected to the fact that the environment was degraded. She was a very deep grassroots environmentalist, and she believed in the movement of women who were most affected, and indigenous knowledge in addressing that gap. And that was extremely genius. And the genius of the Greenbelt movement today rests and lasts, and it has been enduring for the last now almost 45 years. So that, I think, is a very important aspect of who she was. She saw things. Nature was the most important thing. She used to tell me nothing is more important than protecting the environment, because the environment is the most important. It is the center of everything else. And in fact, she would often say, Miriam, you probably heard her often crack jokes. She came from the Christian faith tradition, and often she would say that God, in her infinite wisdom, created the environment first and then created human beings. Because can you imagine if we had been created on Tuesday instead of the last day, we would have been dead by Wednesday. So everything that we needed to survive was created on the days before, and then we were created after. And that was in the infinite wisdom of the Creator, that nature is the source of everything good and everything we need. So Wangari, the environmentalist, taught me a lot about just the centrality of nature in our lives. And today, my work at the World Resources Institute, even though it's anchored in data. Hi, Ruth, my daughter saying hello. She can see us. She says hi to all of you.
Hi, Ruth.
Hey. And even though it was all the work that we do today is anchored so much in evidence and data, I'm always grounded in the reality that it's really right here in the red soil that I see, in the covering of the soils, in the respecting of the rivers and how they flow, and that if we interfere with that, the river will come back and take its space. So then there was Wangari, the peace builder. In fact, you mentioned the Nobel Peace Prize acknowledged the fact that environmental work is peace work. And in fact, that she was inspired by this metaphor of a three-legged stool, that the environment, democratic space, and peace are the three pillars that hold firm the foundation for sustainable development. That we cannot develop as an economy. No country in this world has developed by destroying its environment, eliminating democratic space, and creating areas and points of conflict. That you need those three. And in fact, that's, for many people, the fact that she was an environmentalist who won the Peace Prize, it is lost that it was that connection. If you read the citation that the Nobel Committee gave for why she won the Peace Prize, it was really because she made this intricate connection between the environment, democracy, and peace. And that environmental work was peace work, that eventually destroying the environment will result in conflict. There was Wangari Mathai, the intellectual. She was a woman of the first woman PhD in East and Central Africa. She was a scientist, and of course at the University of Nairobi, but a very inquisitive scientist. And many people argue the fact that the Green Belt movement became what it was largely because she was anchored in this curiosity. These women who are facing environmental degradation, there must be a connection to the fact that the environment is degraded. And maybe if they restore the environment, they can restore the home of the tadpoles. They can restore their fruits, and they can restore all of that. So the intellectual in her was very much alive. And finally, I mentioned she was many things. The politician, the understanding that policy was central, and created a political movement because she said the Mazingira Green Party is needed. We need politics of ideology. We need policy that is anchored in what we believe in. Our values must be coded into our politics. And then, of course, Wangari, the human rights activist. Today, we have the largest green space in Africa because of the work and the activism of women like her. And on I could go. She was an extraordinary woman, but of course, I'm proud that most of all, she was my mother.
Yes, beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing this with us. I love that vision of also God created the environment first, because what would be of us if not all the other things were here? Thank you for that image in my mind. Now that will stay. In terms of her work with environment, with education and awareness, can you mention? So she envisioned when she created the Green Belt movement in Africa, also the Green Belt movement as a special role of education and awareness. Can you mention a little bit about that in terms of her vision of awareness and education?
No, that's a really good point, Miriam. It would have been very easy because she, as I mentioned, my mother was an intellectual. She had a PhD in biological sciences, and she could have just created a curriculum to teach environment and the disconnection between the environment. But the fact that awareness raising and consciousness raising, as she called it, was so important in how people eventually are moved to action. She used to tell me, there's a reason you are moved to action. Action is a verb. You move because something has to move you. And part of that means you have to be stirred inside by a sense of inspiration, by a sense of conviction. And when you start to make the connections between what you see and what you know, you are then moved to action. Permanently, you start to believe. And the Greenbelt movement has borne this out, because they did the heavy lifting of taking the Greenbelt movement's constituency and going through what we called community empowerment and education. A process that was about, before we ever plant a tree, we must understand the connection between the challenges we face today and the actions we take. And that there are some things that, yes, are the purview of the government and policymakers to take care of, but by golly, there are some things that I myself must do. I must farm in ways that are more regenerative, that I can control. I must control my ability to produce for my family, at least, especially in agricultural communities. I must understand how water comes, and that's water. Water doesn't have to come in many other ways, that when it rains and if I interfere with certain ecosystems, I am undermining my own survival. All of that was coded in learning, and largely women who did not know how to read or write. But awareness raising and education was central to how they were inspired and moved to action.
Great. Thank you so much. I like also that image about, it's not just about planting a tree, but it's looking around, what does it mean, and raising awareness on so much things that are underlying that action of planting a tree. So your mother was very much part of the Earth Charter drafting process as an Earth Charter commissioner, and at the beginning, and you also got involved yourself as a member of your council years ago. Can you share with us the vision your mother had, the role, and you have on the role of the Earth Charter as an ethical reference to cultivate a more ethical, collaborative leadership?
Miriam, I hope you can hear me. I see you a little bit sticking, but I hope it's still clear. But yes, you're right. My mother was, first of all, Miriam, as you know, very proud to have been part of the Earth Charter Commission, and was very meticulous, and a lot of people who know her know that every word mattered, just needed to be in the right place. We needed a just world, and I know that for her, all those critical things were important, that we must consider the fact that justice is part of inclusive environment, and the Earth Charter must promote the principles of justice. And then the words sustainability and peace and global interdependence, all of those shared responsibility, the human family, was so much a part of what she felt needed to be coded to guide how we see and engage in this planet. And there were enormous thought-provoking words in the Earth Charter, and in fact, as you said, it was more about the action, more about how we interact and engage with the earth, and the fact that we are connected. The idea of the human family was really important to her as well. So, I mean, there's so much to be said, but she was extremely honored to be at the heart of the Earth Charter. And today, the relevance and importance and centrality of the Earth Charter is, I wish she was here to see.
Okay, so thank you so much for that. Based on your work and experience, what leadership capacity is needed to make faster progress towards sustainability? We know we need to accelerate from all contexts around the world. We need to accelerate how we move towards more sustainable societies, and leadership is very important in that. But what is that kind of leadership? What's the kind of capacity that needs to help us make sustainability or move faster towards that direction?
Yeah.
Can you share with us from your experience?
Yeah. I've been thinking lately a lot about the fact that women around the world, when women's movements, and it's no surprise that you are leading the Earth Charter, women's movements around the world, when there were moments of crisis, the most important decisions needed to be taken, the civil rights movement, the Chipko movement, the Greenbelt movement, all of these movements. And when I was in Europe, in Germany, I was hearing a lot about women's movements and how they transformed lives. In South Africa, I was in Landa in this former township where they talked about the role of music and musicians, women musicians like Brenda Fassie, who essentially were driving through their craft a movement of justice. Women's movements around the world have been inspired to, in moments of crisis, to take charge and essentially inject this sense of connectivity, collaboration, listening to each other, creating room for each other. And all of those are elements, what I call feminist energy. I was very happy to see that you shared. Can you hear me, Miriam? Is it clear? Good. I was very happy to see that you shared the article I wrote on Women Are Coming, because I've been just in that space of, in the moment of the climate crisis that we're in right now, we really need to call on our the spirit of collaboration, the spirit of creating space for others and alternative ideas and alternative voices, lifting others up. Those are all qualities of leadership that are needed at the moment. And we also often say that, and then of course the principle of Ubuntu, which I mentioned earlier. Those to me are the elements of leadership that we need today as we move into a time when there's so much division, so much nationalism, so much fear, so much anxiety, and especially amongst a population of young people who are the most in the planet. Certainly in Africa, 80% of Africans are under the age of 35. So you have an extremely fragile situation at the moment, and it calls for humility, it calls for inclusion, it calls for acknowledging that we need everybody at the table and not just a few people. So I call it the feminist energy needs to be unleashed.
Thank you. We are going to go into a break, so that a little bit for, and ask everybody to think what from Wanjira in terms of Africa, work of WRI, include leadership, and what we can learn from Wangari Mathai's style of leadership, collaborative leadership, I would call, in this role of women. So is that okay? So let me send you to breakout rooms, and we're going to be there for about 8 minutes, so you have time to get to know one another, and then we come back to plenary again, okay? See you shortly. Okay, hello everyone. How was the chat? Hope you had a good talk, yeah? With someone, I would like to hear from anyone who would like to share with a bigger group any comments you may have from your insights, from what you have heard, or from your conversation in the group. If I don't hear a quick raise hand, I'm gonna give the floor. I'm gonna start making cold calls, but there was no need. So let's hear Ciro and Deborah.
Yes. Hi, and please allow me not to put on my camera. I'm in no state to be seen. It's in the evening. I'm in the same city as Wanjira, if she's in Nairobi. And so it's evening for us. And I joined because I know her. I'm very proud of her. And I thought, wow, that's quite an expensive webinar, but let me attend. And my mind is blown. I work in governance. I've worked in governance for almost 20 years. I left the institution that I founded a year ago And I've been wondering about my next step and wondering how to link governance with climate change. And, you know, the first half of this conversation just lays it out. So my mind is blown. I feel like apologizing for my ignorance that this information has been out there. And I, as a governance practitioner, have not been aware of the three-legged stool. So one, very proud of Wanjira and her work, inspired by her mom's legacy, and so happy to encounter the Earth Charter. So many lessons here. More power to you, and thank you for this forum.
Thank you, Cyril. It's good to hear you. Thank you. Deborah?
So I think the one thing that a number of us had talked about was the idea that of being moved to action, and that to keep on doing the action because we know it's the right thing to do, even if we don't see the fruit of that right in this lifetime even, but that we will keep on doing things because it's kind of like the hummingbird thing, right, too, the hummingbird story, right? That and that came out, I think, in a previous, the East and West dialogue the other day, the gal from Bhutan, and she said the same thing. You know, it's about planting the seed, but you might not actually see the fruit of your work, but you do it because it's the right thing to do. And that was something that we talked about.
Good. Thank you, Deborah. You may not see the fruit of your work, but if you think you're in the right path, keep going. Good. And probably Wangari didn't see the fruit of her work immediately. I like to mention that Deborah is in the middle of the Pacific. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
Who is that?
No, I was with Deborah in the same group. I'm Jane Kilonzo from Kenya, and I think she had some very interesting insights from her experience where she is in Tuam. Is it some island?
Is an island in the Pacific. She's in the middle of the night.
Right, on women leadership. Debbie, I thought it would be nice for you to share here as well.
Oh, so I was just saying that like in Micronesia here, a lot of the islands, the indigenous communities, they were matriarchal. And then like on Guam, because they were were colonized by the Spanish for like 400 years, and then the Japanese and then the Americans, and we're still a colony, but that changed it from the matriarchal system to more the patriarchal kind of system. But currently, our governor is a female, and at least half of our senators are females, and the women are the ones that are leading a lot of the movements, like for the environment, for protecting, you know, certain sacred areas, even for, you know, standing up for Palestine. It's the females on our island that are the main ones that are helping to bring voice to people and to stand up for these causes. Yeah.
Thank you, Lucy. And I think I saw Alida's hand up, or you didn't raise your hand, Alida? No. Okay. Okay, Lucy.
Thank you, Miriam. Hi, everyone. I'm Lucy. I just wanted to share something very quickly from our group. I was with Valerie and Hirotaka, and I think something we were really touched from what Wanjira was sharing was about, you know, raising awareness and moving people to action. And, you know, I work with young people, and Hirotaka was also sharing that, you know, he has aspirations of working in education for young people. And we were really, you know, talking about how we can, you know, instill that kind of spirit within young people so that they want to take positive action. And Valerie mentioned a really nice phrase, value creation education. I'm not sure in the context that you were using it, Valerie, but it made me reflect on my own like education at university, which was very, very critical and very analytical. And it was really kind of, you know, trained my brain to think very critically and analytically. And, you know, I realized when I left, I was very critical, for example, of the Sustainable Development Goals agenda, but only after, you know, starting to really work with an NGO that is kind of rooted in the philosophy of value creating, that I really started to transform those kind of mindsets and really start to engage in things like positively and not kind of, yeah, just taking a seat and taking a backseat and, you know, observing them from like a critical lens, but just thinking, how can I, you know, create positive value? So, yeah, thank you. I wanted to share that.
Good to hear you, Lucy. Thank you. Where are you located, Lucy?
I'm in the UK in London.
Yeah, good. Thank you. Amanda? And then Elizabeth.
Hi everyone. I just wanted to mention that in my group, I was with Alide in the Netherlands, so Chima Michael in Nigeria, and Khadija in the Philippines. And we were talking about this importance of having that balance with the feminine and the masculine values. And Alide reminded us of how Dr. Wangari Mathai was imprisoned. And that's usually something that you think of that happens to a man, you know, like Nelson Mandela or Martin Luther King Jr. So I think it's really important to remember that even though we have these values like bravery and humility, I think they're both just as important, because without Wangari Mathai's bravery, we wouldn't be talking about her today. But we also need like her humility and her compassion. And I don't know, I hope we can find a way to include that in every classroom, you know, in every webinar that we have, in every conversation, because we really do need that balance.
Thank you, Amanda. Balance between bravery and humility. That's good. And we saw that certainly. Elizabeth? You have your hand up if you want to open your mic.
Yes. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, good evening, everyone, and thank you. I'm from Nairobi. I've been invited by Jen Kilonzo. Thank you, Jen. This is fantastic. I just wanted to recap one aspect of sustainability. I think inclusivity. Women, we are naturally, I think, wired that way for a win-win, to want to win for everyone. And so it's something we capitalize on. Of course, it's not an easy journey learning from what the late Professor Wangari Maathai went through to bring a change, but increasingly causing awareness, even starting from our own small setup, I think eventually rolls the ball to the society and the nations. Yeah, so I just want to appreciate that we already at an advantage position as women, because we are naturally nurturers. We care for environment, for family, for everyone. So just that commitment to take a step, I think for me that is has been a challenge. It challenged me, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Elizabeth. So let me encourage any one of you who wants to make a comment or ask a question to write in the chat box. We certainly welcome that. But now we are going to turn back to Wanjira. But again, I want to encourage you. I'm going to be reading the chat box. If you want to say a word about your insight into this conversation, you're welcome. Or any comment or question you may have this session today. So Wanjira, back to you. We heard here about one of the things was the role of youth and women, and you have been working specifically for some years in youth empowerment leadership in Africa, specifically. So can you share with us what were you doing? What was your vision? What is that project?
Yes, first of all, just to appreciate the comments that we heard from everyone, just really, really powerful. I was thrown into a group even though I wasn't supposed to be there, so I didn't hear everything, but the report back was really, really special. I think most people resonate with so much of what is just, so much of what can we do, and so there's this draw. Youth have always been a part of inclusion. When you consider the word inclusion, so many people say, you know, we add a youth to the podium and so we have inclusion. There's so much more that has to be done to demonstrate inclusion. And so for us at the Wangari Maathai Foundation, we've been thinking about what inclusion really means, what it really means to create spaces where youth are engaged, are empowered, lead, and we actually believe it and relinquish the reins so that the young people are leading. I love the quote. My mother had one quote which always reminded me of how inclusive she was, especially about the generation that destroys the environment is not the generation that pays the price. And that was always so powerful about why young people are anxious today, why young people feel frustrated by the inaction of the generation that we are and we represent. And so there's a whole bridge from one generation to the other, a sense of responsibility, intergenerational conversations that are needed, intergenerational leadership, space mentorship that creates opportunities for young people not to be thrust into scary spaces, but to be mentored into them and to actually create fair share spaces and fair share wages for young people so that they can step in and feel that they are surrounded, they are mentored, they're not being thrust. So there's a whole body of work there that the Wangari Mathai Foundation feels is important, that is intentional and is not just an add-on to everything. So at the foundation, the youth are that is the pillar, and the leadership demonstrates that. And I love the comment that somebody made. You may not see the fruit of what you're working for, but you keep going. That's exactly right. The fact that I mentioned Karura Forest, the Kenyans in the group will know that the forest, and many Africans, the Karura Forest was a 10-year battle to save and liberate that forest for the general public. My mother never thought it would be free in her lifetime, let alone mine. She always used to tell us that perhaps your children's children will enjoy Karura Forest. Today, it is the most extraordinary recreational green space, 1,000 hectares in the middle of the city. It is nowhere else in Africa do we have that. It was the vision of one person, the power of one, that each of us can be potent agents of change, because you never know. Once you start, you create a wave, and you shouldn't see it as an isolating thing. But here came, people resonated, and the celebration that is Karura today is beyond anything she had ever imagined. I can tell you that for free. So that's sort of my reflections. And I also wanted to reflect on what Jerry said, because the reality is, so often the environmental and the political was seen as separate. But for us in Kenya, and for many people who followed my mother's work, the environmental became political, always in spaces of activism, protecting the forest from political misappropriation, protecting the green spaces for children, for inclusion, for people to have the right of access, and the ultimate culmination in a constitution in Kenya, which, like very few others, has now coded in it the right to a green and healthy environment. The fact that today any of us can stand in a court of law and say that we have a right to protect a green space, and it has locus standi in a court of law, that was an accomplishment that was out of the work of Wangari Mathai and the Greenbelt movement. It is huge for us today.
Thank you, Wanjira. Bringing some of the voices that we have here in the chat box, Alide Rurik, who is joining us from the Netherlands. She says how grateful she is for being here in the session, but she also shared 2 videos. So one video that was made, I think, with Wangari, that is called The Quiet Revolution, that was done under the leadership of SGI, Soka Gakkai in Japan, and John Anderson, I think, is still here, although it's Japan time. Thank you, John. So yes, so Wangari Mathai's participation in the Quiet Revolution video, it's outstanding and it's still very valuable. So I just wanted to bring this to our attention and say thank you for sharing the links. And Tami, who is joining us from Manaus in Brazil, in the Amazon, she asked a question. So interesting, because Tami is working with a Soka Amazon Institute that is based in Manaus, and they are working on reforestation and environmental awareness and education in Brazil, specifically in the Amazon region. So Tamia says, Wanjira, thank you very much for your words. I feel that I'm meeting your mother through you. Could you share any words for the youth who are here, especially when you face any hardship? When you face any hardship, how you stand up and don't give up?
Wow, yes, that's hard. And I saw another question that I could answer right away. I think this one was from Deborah. Yes, my mother knew Vandana Shiva very well. They were sisters, and in many ways they shared their love for grassroots activism, their fight for dignity of the peasantry. And I really, I visited Vandana in Dehradun and just loved the work that she was doing. They were both rooted, so deeply rooted in grassroots work, and yet were one of the very few of anyone we know who would go from the absolute grassroots and to the highest levels of government anywhere in the world and be equally comfortable. They are gifts of our generation, and Vandana is just one of those. If anybody doesn't know her, you should definitely do. Yeah, I think for young people, when you face hardships, what do you do? I mean, hardships are hardships. I mean, I happened to be raised by an optimist, so I have a lot of things to keep me going. One of them was giving up is not an option. And it was actually an acronym in our house. Giving up is not an option. And so you just had to figure out, what are we going to do? So you often, when something is difficult, if you ask yourself, so what am I going to do? It actually becomes almost like, when you're playing a board game, or you're playing a game, you reach a load block. So then what am I going to do? How do I work around this? And so it's just the moment. And because giving up is not an option, you have to figure out what you're going to do. And then the fact that, and this one I must say remains in my heart of hearts, the most inspiring thing I think about. Every cloud has a silver lining. Find it and hang on to it. That I always feel deeply inspired by, because really, when giving up is not an option, you have to find the silver lining. It's there, might be very thin, but you find it and you hang on to it.
Let's keep that. Giving up is not an option. Thank you, Wanjira. So
maybe, Miriam,
yeah,
maybe one more thing I remember from Wangari was her sense of humor.
Yes.
And we could laugh so much being in the women's toilet, for instance, talking about the women's room and having a gathering in the women's room and laughing. That I think is maybe one way to cope. At the same time, when
absolutely. Yeah, I think so, Alida. That's such a good point. And it was one of the things that when people ask me, people always ask, how was your mother? Tell me things about her, but also how was she misunderstood? Very few people, because she seemed, Eleanor, so tough as nails. She seemed like she was, for many people, that the fact that people didn't think she had a sense of humor was something that they missed. She was hilarious. And so I know Miriam and Alida and others who knew her. And I gave you one thing that she would say, but she had multiple moments. She loved a good laugh. And we spent, in fact, to just show you that even when I was growing up, when I would come across a funny joke, I would send it to her. She would love the world of memes, because today you can send an image and it's sort of like funny. So we had a lot of good laughs, but it was obviously for her as well such a great outlet. She had a great support, good friends, and she definitely laughed a lot.
Thank you. We have two more questions, but because you talked about hardship in Wangari, I wanted to share a specific thing that I always remember. It was in the late 90s, and the UN organized every year a Commission on Sustainable Development meeting in New York at the UN. And talking about hardship, I remember that Wangari came to that New York meeting without money. She had no place to stay. And she came to me and said, well, I found a place at the YMCA, and somehow they gave me almost for free. So that was how Wangari Mathai was. She wanted to go to that meeting. Somehow she found a way. It was a UN meeting around the UN Commission for Sustainable Development in the late 90s. And I was so impressed when she said, I had no place to sleep last night in New York, and she was there. Anyway, she joined a side event meeting on the Earth Charter after that. And I was impressed with the smile, with like as if she was sleeping in a five-star hotel.
In a five-star hotel.
Yes. That didn't preclude her from attending a meeting. So for me, that is a good example of how she faced hardship.
Yeah.
Anyway, I do
I
remember
must
that.
say, Miriam, you must know that after some time, she grew to love the YMCA because the swimming pool at the YMCA was so amazing. And very few other places have a nice swimming pool. So she would actually opt into the YMCA very often. So
See, little
I
secrets,
remember
guys, if you
sharing
go
a
to New
very
York.
small bed there. So yeah, the world of Astoria to the YMCA, we've been there.
Yes, yeah, very nice. Thank you for sharing that. So two more questions for you. How can we strengthen more, talking about local, regional, and global inclusive leadership and partnerships towards sustainability and planetary well-being, how can we strengthen more effective, inclusive, and leadership and partnership at these different levels, local, regional, global? And what do you think has worked and what has not worked in terms of these different layers, local, regional, global leadership and partnerships for sustainability?
You know, I think about this a lot because that's my job description. But I have to say that it can be very theoretical, right? What are these good partnerships? At the end of the day, what really, really matters is the impact we're having on people's lives. And that is at a country level, at a grassroots level. And what I've said to my organization is the partnerships we forge have to have relevance from the bottom up. They have to mean something in the countries where we work. So what is the community of purpose that we are building at the country level? And then that community of purpose has sense in a regional level. Because there's no point for me to go and meet the African Union or to go and meet the UN Environment Commission or Economic Commission for Africa or the Africa Development Bank if my agenda is anything but what is emerging from what matters most, and that is the dignity and the livelihoods of people. And wherever we are, whatever that is, if you're in the North, there is an element of dignity and equity and nature and climate that matters. And everything has to come from that. And so our partnership building needs to find relevance regionally and globally, but anchored in a very local needs and local justice agenda, in my opinion.
Thank you, Wanjira. So last question. As we move ahead in the crucial work of social and environmental advocacy, we're all looking towards a social transformation, moving towards and trying to contribute from our different contexts, processes of social transformation. What do you think are the real life examples or other life examples that are on the cusp of building a more sustainable world or societies? Some life examples.
You know what I love is, Miriam, those examples are just everywhere around us. They're literally in Costa Rica, they are in Guam, they are wherever we are at the moment, because there are people everywhere who are invisible to others outside of your geography, but that are doing exactly what is needed to bring about transformation. They may not have the resources that are needed, so we need to figure out how does finance flow and communities get their fair share. They are producing food for communities in some of the most difficult environments. They are transforming landscapes, protecting rivers. There's faith traditions that are anchored in indigenous faith traditions that are anchored in the protection of nature, that are mind-boggling in their understanding of nature's bounty and nature's beauty, and that we need to be anchored in a very local understanding of what matters around us, and that those sources of inspiration, the genius of what's needed in our varied geographies and landscapes is right there where we are.
Well, thank you so much, Wanjira, and thank you everyone for joining us today. It's very inspiring. I want to invite everyone who is here, if you feel like, to write one sentence in the chat box about how you feel about after the session. What's any highlight or insights you have had? How do you feel, or any insight you have had from this session? If you can write in the chat box so that all of us, and Wanjira and me, we can read you. And with that, I also want to mention we are at the beginning of 2024. I feel we are beginning at the 24. In Brazil, we are beginning the carnival, but in China, it's the beginning of the new year, the Chinese lunar year, the dragon year. So I'm trying to envision us flying on the top of the dragon in 2024. And I want to wish happy new lunar year of the Chinese calendar that's starting tomorrow. And also celebrate the fact that February, in some parts of the world, we celebrate the Day of the Love or the Valentine, whatever you want to call, and the importance of bringing love and care in everything we do. And sometimes we feel the disconnection with the world. We feel distressed and overwhelmed. But when we are able to connect to our feelings of love and care, not only for ourselves and our close families, but also to the large living world, as things happen in a more smooth way. I just want to end acknowledging that. And Wanjira, do you have any final words that you would like to conclude before we actually close this session?
No, enjoying seeing the words coming through. Thank you all so much. Your faces have been inspiring too, and I've really enjoyed. The time has flown by, and this has been extraordinary. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. As you know, we organize this under our UNESCO chair on education for sustainable development with their charter that's located here in Costa Rica, on the campus of the University for Peace and their charter international. This is part of a series of masterclass we have been organizing and to provide a space to connect and learn from one another. Thank you so much, Wanjira, for being here with us, and see you, all of you, next time we have a masterclass and a live session.
Thank you, Miriam. Amanda, thank you too.
Gracias.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.